Oh, hello. Welcome to my La Galleria. I notice you're entranced by this magnificent piece. I'm quite fond of it myself. I'm still not entirely sure what it is yet, but I know it's brilliant because it cost me $6.2 million. United States dollars, that is. I would never touch Canadian currency, and don't even get me started on the Australians. Come, gaze upon my collection. See this one? I acquired it in an auction in Belarus. I won it right from under Marquis de Dupont's water-riddled nose. He really must acquaint himself with my dermatologist. His appearance is just ghastly. Ah, yes, and this one. This is perhaps my favorite in the collection. I would describe it as je ne sais quoi, wouldn't you agree? Yes, I'm aware, I am quite cultured. I know art, you see, because I expend such a fortune to obtain it.
Fuck that guy. Humans have always strove to create and express themselves in different ways. From cave scribbles to canvas paintings and sculpting to animation and film, human ingenuity and creativity continues to expand and evolve. And with this evolution naturally comes new forms of technology, but also new forms of art. Games are nothing new. Cribbage was made in the early 17th century, 400 years ago, and I still don't know how to play it. And there are plenty of games and sports that date back even further. I'm sure there are plenty of games lost to history that are as old as the human race itself. Throughout human history, we have always desired to express and entertain ourselves through art and games. But does that mean that games are a form of art? Maybe. This is one of the most difficult questions I've ever come across, and it puzzles many philosophers to this day. Many people have varying definitions of what a game is, but all these definitions identify three key aspects. A game needs to have rules, interactivity, and a goal. Some will argue there needs to be a challenge as well, but this isn't universally agreed upon. And I believe the three characteristics of rules, interactivity, and a goal can be sufficient in defining a game in the modern age. Here's why. Rules and interactivity are pretty self-explanatory. You need to be able to interact with something to be able to play with it. And without rules, the plaything is just a toy. On the idea of a goal, games exist that don't necessarily have a goal, like TheSims. Sure, you can set a goal for yourself, but it's not inherently part of the game. But I argue The Sims is a simulation, not a game. It's in the name after all. I am on the side of having a goal being a defining aspect of a game. Whether it's an inherent part of the game or the players create it, a game needs a concluding or a win condition. On the idea of challenge, if it is taken literally, it is a completely subjective term. What if someone is so good at chess that no one can beat them? Does this invalidate chess as a game? No, because there are plenty of others that still find it challenging. And if this means that games are defined by the individual's ability, then games cannot be defined, and there's no point to classifying this form of media, which is a ridiculous notion. Some have defined challenge in this context as the idea of an opponent or something to overcome, which makes it more understandable. But if this is the case, then reaching the objective faster or performing better would be part of the goal, making this challenge part of the goal. For the purposes of this video, I will be using these three characteristics for my definition of games. So a game is an interactive activity with a specific goal and a set of constrictions or rules that make achieving that goal potentially more challenging. Cool. Now for something much easier to define. Art. How do you define art? How do you define art? What the fuck? How do you define art? Is this art? Is this art? Is this art? What is this? Oh my god, what am I doing? Art is perhaps the most subjective abstract concept to attempt to define, so this is going to be troublesome to say the least. So I'll put it like this. I believe art is the creative self-expression of a sentient, intelligent being through a medium, whether they be human or not. I word this definition in this way because I believe some animals are capable of expressing themselves through external media like painting. You could argue that the animal doesn't understand what it's doing, but neither does an infant. This is why I specify intelligent. If the animal is capable of differentiating colors or shapes, it is entirely possible the animal is picking those colors and shapes for a reason, or they at least have a preference. Either way, that is a form of expression. The sentient specification denies the existence of AI art. The current state of technology cannot produce a truly sentient artificial intelligence. The way these AI models work is through an irresponsible and likely unethical amount of pattern recognition. And this pattern recognition is not the same as that of animals. In images, animals recognize features like eyes, shadows, fingers, things familiar to them. AI models see pixels, their color values, and their placement in a grid. In sound and music, animals recognize voices, the qualities of instruments, the sounds of common objects and actions. AI identifies frequencies, waveforms, and their timings. AI models take copious amounts of information, break it down into fundamental components, and Frankenstein them into these terrifyingly familiar monstrosities. This is done in the coldest, analytical way possible. There is no story because there is no experience. No experience because there is no sentience. No sentience means it has no self to express, therefore it cannot be art, it is lifeless. There is no such thing as AI art. And anyone claiming to be an AI artist is a hack fraud that's too lazy to actually put the effort into developing a skill and too scared to truly put a piece of themselves on display. A person who only cares about the easiest and safest way to make money. The furthest thing from a true artist. And with that, I can finally get to what I wanted to discuss in the first place. Are video games art? First, we should ask ourselves, are games art, in general? Is the guy who made cribbage an artist? Well, he was a poet. Shit, bad example. He was an artist of an unrelated medium before he made the game. The game did not make him an artist. Is the guy who made Monopoly an artist? Well, actually, Charles Darrow is a piece of shit that made Monopoly by stealing the rules of a game called The Landlord's Game created by Elizabeth Maggie, just to profit off of it. Which is incredibly ironic, since Maggie was an economic activist that created The Landlord's Game to teach people the dangers of predatory corporate tactics. So I would say Elizabeth Maggie was an artist for creating a unique interactive learning piece that expresses her distaste for certain capitalistic trends. And Charles Darrow can go fuck himself for profiting off something he stole. Oh yeah, and Monopoly sucks. As we can see from Elizabeth Maggie, games can be art with proper motivation and execution. Video games are obviously games. The main difference in how I would define video games is the idea of rules. Video games have features, which are things like interactables, level design, visual and sound indicators, and mechanics, which are the player's interaction with these features and the result of the interaction. Mechanics and features are the rules of a video game. So with this, we can say that video games can also be art, which brings us to prestige games. Prestige games are video games that attempt to be serious art, tackling important topics that lesser games in the industry can't begin to fathom. The people who genuinely use this term believe prestige games are the pinnacle of the medium and treat it like it's high art. These people are called Philistines. Prestige games tend to be extremely expensive projects that only quintuple A video game companies can even afford to make. This is because they tend to have hyper-realistic graphics and full performance capture. These two things eat up a ton of time and money, which means the company needs to water down the content of their game to appeal to the lowest common denominator in order to maximize sales and make their money back. This practice leads to games that lack a visual identity, are saturated with tropes, cliches, cringe Disney-style humor, copy gaming trends like needless upgrade trees, bloated content, and open worlds. No matter how much it's peddled as high art, most decisions made still focus on the safety of the investment, and there's nothing less artistic than risk mitigation. Now, this doesn't mean all games that are regarded as prestige are corpo sludge. There are some excellent games out there that really push the envelope on what big budget games can be, like God of War Ragnarök and Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. But if the game is marketed as high art, it's probably going to be shit. These projects often primarily focus on aesthetics. The pristine visuals, the chunky foley, sweeping orchestral arrangements, art house writing and performances. These elements can elevate the experience of the video game, but are mainly used just to sell it. All these things can be demonstrated in a game trailer, whereas gameplay cannot be. What's tricky is these elements are all forms of art in their own right.
So doesn't that mean that all video games are art through the transitive property?
No, you fucking nerd! These elements are not the game itself. They're surface-level pieces, but not the core of the game. Let's start with the visuals and sound. These two pieces are the most important of the aesthetics in a video game. It doesn't matter how clever a game mechanic is used, or how much damage a weapon does if it's not satisfying to use. This is where appropriate visual and sound design come into play. You may have heard of a concept called
game feel.
This is the sauce that makes a game satisfying to play. It's the impact of recalling the Leviathan axe in God of War, cutting shit to ribbons in Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, landing on an incline just right in haste. These actions feel incredibly satisfying because the visuals and sound match the actions so well. Input, timing, context, and a slew of other factors also contribute to game feel. And I'm not going to try to pry into the science of what makes a game feel good. That's just a fool's errand, because it's basically a case-by-case basis. However, the aesthetics of visuals and sound play the biggest role in taking an action from feels pretty good to euphoric. Have you heard this before? What about this? Or this? All these songs are iconic, and they're all from video games. Music is a major proponent of a video game. It's part of a game's identity. But does that mean that it's important to the gameplay itself? No. Everybody knows the Super Mario theme. Every Gen Z and younger knows Megalovania. Every weeb, and by proxy their normal friends, knows Simple and Clean. But this doesn't mean they've played these games. In these cases, the music transcends the game. You can have a shit game with great music. Have you heard the music in Code Vein? It's awesome. The music in a video game can add to the experience of playing it, but that doesn't mean it's necessary for the core gameplay. Now there's the genre of rhythm games, but even then, I would argue the timing, visuals, and sound design of input feedback is more important to the game than the actual music itself. Earlier, I listed writing and performances as aesthetics. I don't know if this is accurate phrasing, but I'm lumping it into the group because it's easier for me this way. On the topic of performances, there are good, bad, and serviceable performances. I don't really have much to say on this. I'm not going to nitpick acting decisions, especially since games with big enough budgets for professional voice acting and professional performance capture tend to hire quality actors. And since performances are essentially an extension of the writing, I'm going to focus on that. Video game writing is something I have had many issues with throughout my gaming career. Most of the time, I believe it's unnecessary. There are games with fantastic writing out there, like the new generation God of Wars, Baldur's Gate, Dark Souls, Metal Gear Solid, and Nier Automata, but those are also really high-quality experiences even without the writing. Well, maybe not Baldur's Gate. My beef with video game writing is that people don't understand what makes video game writing good. So often do I play a game where it's written in a way that has no bearing on the gameplay, like it's an afterthought. The writing is more often used as a blanket to cover up the boring-ass game underneath, or it's clearly tacked on after the fact and doesn't impact anything in a meaningful way. This is what makes for poor video game writing. The writing needs to tie in with the game in some way, and not in the form of cutscenes. Cutscenes aren't inherently bad, but they're poorly utilized most of the time. Most modern games throw all the storytelling elements into the cutscenes of the game, completely isolating the storytelling from the gameplay. This sucks. It makes the story and cutscenes feel completely pointless. When writing a game story, you need to tie the writing in with the game in some way. It can be very obvious, like in Baldur's Gate, where your choices and actions directly influence the plot, or it could be more subtle, like Nier Automata and Dark Souls, where there's a canon explanation for why you can die and come back to life. The writing needs to feel like it's rooted to the game, like it's a part of it. But this doesn't mean forcing the player into a specific action just because it fits your narrative. If a game forces the player's hand by blocking progress until a specific action is done, then tries to shove it in the player's face as part of some ham-fisted pseudo-noble message, that's shit writing. But the biggest mistake I see people make when writing for a video game is writing a narrative when the game doesn't need one. Most video games don't need a story, or at least not an invasive one. I love games like the original Castlevania, where the player's motivation is to reach the top of the castle, kill Dracula, and have fun. Or Mario, where you want to stop the turtle guy, save the princess, and have fun. There are games like Suda Regalia and Dark Souls that you can just blast through without any regard for the character's motivation or the plot. Both of these games have stories that you can delve into, if you want to, but the game isn't going to force it down your throat. I have so much respect for games like this. The developers understand why the player is playing the game. Sure, they have background stories, sometimes they're unfathomably in-depth, but the player isn't forced into knowing every little detail. Most games don't need a narrative. The story should be the unique experience you have playing it, the journey of the player. This brings me to the most important aspect of video games, and the thing most prestige games are lacking in. The game. The thing that many hextuple A developers seem to forget about. The aesthetics and writing don't matter if the game they surround sucks. And modern video games are so diverse that it's difficult to generally identify what makes one shitty and another great, but from what I've found, it comes down to polish, originality, and potential. I feel like I shouldn't have to explain why a buggy game is a bad thing. When you play a game, you want it to work. Of course, a well-polished game is going to feel and perform better than one that's riddled with glitches. But there are fringe cases where bugs create a more unique and engaging experience because of how strange they are. There seems to be a sweet spot, the golden toilet ratio of polish and shit. If this ratio is hit, it makes for a very memorable and fun experience that can stick with you forever. These are games like the first Sonic Adventure and Oblivion. Their charm comes from the buggy weirdness. Sometimes the experiences these games provide outshine and outlast even the most pristine of their kin. Polish is a sign of a quality product, a competent developer, and the care put into the project. It's a sign of a strong desire to create a great and memorable experience. But bugginess can be a sign of ambition that just lacked resources, which is admirable in its own right and can also lead to an unforgettable experience. This specifically applies to smaller teams and companies, though. When a company like, Bethesda releases a barely functioning piece of shit, it should be seen as unacceptable and lazy because they've got Skyrim money. Nice. Unoriginality is the opposite of art. No one is the same psychologically, not even identical twins, so self-expression is always going to differ. A game that is unoriginal, I cannot consider art. Okay, there are like a million games out there, so you're bound to have 2 or 3 games with similarities, but when an entire franchise is essentially the same game, only differing in look, or at most, very minor mechanical changes, then there is nothing original about these games. You could argue that the first was original, and maybe it was. However, the publisher saw the green by selling the same product over and over again because making any kind of change would be much too risky. As I said before, focusing on monetary gain goes against what it means to be a true artist. But the sad thing is, I've seen a lot of smaller developers fail to make original games too. I would like to preface this by saying many indie games I've played are unique creative visions that show a lot of the dev's passion and appreciation for the medium. I do not want to make it sound as though I think this for all independent developers, but there is a subsect that need to be addressed. Now, there's the obvious content farm asset flip made in 3 hours in my mom's basement bullshit you see all over Steam. Clearly, these are just there to make money, and hopefully, no one really buys these anyway. Hopefully. What I'm talking about are games that are clearly inspired by 1 or 2 specific games that attempt to just emulate that inspiration instead of doing anything new or different. Take the game Mortal Shell, for instance. It is undoubtedly inspired by Dark Souls. Just look at it. The movement, the camera, the combat, the items, the controls, all of it screams,
Dark Souls is my hero!
But just imitating Dark Souls doesn't make you Dark Souls. It makes you an imitation. Sure, Mortal Shell has a unique mechanic called hardening that is essentially just a block but more inconvenient, and a feature that makes understanding the use of items even more irritating than Dark Souls. But these 2 things don't make up for the fact that the whole time playing it, you keep thinking, man, this is just Dark Souls but worse. The developers didn't use Dark Souls as inspiration, they used it as the goal of the project. Games like this could be really fun and unique if they focus on inspiration as inspiration. The original mechanics and features need to be substantial in usage and occurrence for the game to truly stand out. This is what irks me the most. Squandered potential. In games, nothing irritates me more than a really interesting, unique mechanic or feature that is barely or poorly utilized. Like the wind waypoint bullshit in Ghost of Tsushima. I'll explain. In Ghost of Tsushima, one of the standout features that the developers were so damn proud of was a feature where the wind would blow in the direction of where you needed to go, instead of placing an eyesore of a waypoint on the screen. This was a way of making traversal feel more immersive. It's a cool idea. In theory. However, if you want to change the destination, you need to pause the fucking game to look at the world map, then place a waypoint marker. Close the menu, then activate the wind feature. This completely defeats the purpose of an immersive navigational system. Ghost of Tsushima also has a really good basis for a combat system, but they don't come close to reaching its potential. Ignoring the stealth, which I'll get to later, Ghost of Tsushima's combat comes down to 4 sword fighting stances that are used in a rock, paper, scissors fashion. Each stance is strong against a different kind of enemy. This requires the player to change stances based off their foe. Sounds interesting, right? Well, it is. Then it's not. The problem with this system, and this may sound like a strange complaint, is that the stances are far too effective. The combat then turns into, oh, this guy has a shield, so I'll use water stance and mash triangle. This guy's got a spear, so I'll switch to wind stance and mash triangle. This guy looks like Sloth from the Goonies, so I'll use moon stance and kick him a bunch. It becomes a standard operation. There's no adaptation anymore. And if you focus on learning the stances as soon as you can, the game's difficulty plateaus a third of the way in. You could argue that the stealth system and mechanics add variety to the game that keep it fresh and interesting, but I would completely disagree. The stealth in Ghost of Tsushima is an overly simplified version of Assassin's Creed, which is itself a watered-down version of a real stealth game like Metal Gear Solid or Hitman. The stealth gameplay amounts to walking up behind people, pressing square, and repeat. There's no challenge to stealth when every enemy is Helen Keller. What's more frustrating is the game incentivizes the player to use the stealth by tying features and mechanics to it, which are completely unneeded, because the stealth already trivializes the game. Not to mention it's forced on the player in half the story missions. This simpleton stealth that is somehow an easier derivative of Assassin's Creed is not doing anything new. The unique aspects of its combat system is left to die by the wayside because there's so much incentive to use this trite, overdone stealth bullshit. They could have done so much more with the samurai combat, like adding in a duck to go under higher attacks. Add different melee weapons your character can use, making enemies that change their weapons and stances, requiring you to as well. I think they should have just scrapped the stealth in general to focus 100% on the samurai stuff, because that's what makes the game unique. But instead, they decided to play it safe by following the Ubisoft handbook, but somehow making it even less satisfying. I really like a lot of the ideas in Ghost of Tsushima, but I can't fucking stand the game because all of its potential is wasted and buried. Another example of wasted potential would be The Last of Us Part 2. This game has really detailed, dynamic combat animations that make the encounters really intense and engaging, but they only make up for 15% of the game at most. The rest is cutscenes, quick-time events, and walking around pressing triangle to pick things up. There are these little cable physics puzzles that I think are the best part of the game, but again, they only make up for maybe 30 minutes of the 20 to 40 hour game. There's an interesting game here, but it's covered up by over-bloated cutscenes, dialogue, and pointless exploration. There needs to be more focus on the actual unique gameplay. I truly believe this would have been a much better experience if the game was 5 to 8 hours long and was small stealth combat trials interspersed with shorter cutscenes and cable puzzles. Or just make a whole game of cable puzzles. Also, the writing sucks. And speaking of writing, the game structure can actually be squandered by the writing. I've already talked at length about what makes for good video game writing, and this ties in with that. There are rare cases where the game lends itself to have very high potential for interesting writing, and it's not taken. An example would be Grand Theft Auto. I know a ton of GTA fans are frothing at the mouth and rubbing their asses on the screen right now, but hear me out. Rockstar Games, the GTA and Red Dead guys, excel at making extremely deep and well thought out simulated worlds. This is what sets them apart in the industry and what makes their games take 10,000 years to release. This is the reason why GTA 5 roleplay is still super popular 12 years later. Rockstar is the king of simulated worlds. There's no denying this quality of their games. But where I believe Rockstar truly fails is their stories. I have never found the stories of GTA 4, 5, or Red Dead Redemption 2 engaging or interesting. And think the reason why is I find the execution disappointing. These are games with such intricate, dynamic worlds that you would expect the story to match. But it doesn't. The stories of these games are completely linear. The choices you make, the actions you take as a player have no impact on the events that happen. This, I feel, completely goes against the strengths of the game. In Red Dead Redemption 2, you should be able to choose who to help at camp and who not to. So you could decide to leave that fuckhead Micah in prison, progress the story in a different way without him, and that changes certain outcomes down the road. I understand this is much harder to do, but this is Rockstar we're talking about. If Larian Studios can pull it off, Rockstar can too. It's just so ass backwards that a game crafted to give the player so much freedom has such a rigid story. Squandered potential doesn't just apply to the mechanics and features of the game, it can apply to the visuals, sound, music, and the writing and performances. I've already mentioned that these are all art forms in their own right, and that something like an iconic song can transcend the game itself. These aspects are all made by artists, often very talented ones, and I find it very disappointing when a game looks and sounds beautiful but does nothing new nor make any improvements on something familiar, which is far too common today. This is why I get so frustrated with companies that release games that could be much better yet have all the aesthetics look and sound immaculate. They're completely neglecting the interactive aspects and the rules. They're neglecting the medium. They're neglecting the game. What's the point of making a video game if the game part is low priority? Why is it not a film or a mini-series on Netflix? Clearly the publishers, or maybe even the developers in some cases, goal is to sell on aesthetic alone. This is where you need to ask yourself, is the game art? Or is it just the aesthetic? Because this is where I am seeing a lot of people getting it confused. These qualities of polish, originality, and potential are what I believe separate a shitty game from a great one. And even if a game is lacking polish, or it hasn't reached its full potential, doesn't disqualify it as being art. It will just kind of suck. The drawings parents put on their fridges to keep their kids from crying kind of art. It's not very skillful, but it's still unique and expressive. But the quality of originality is something that cannot be compromised. Games can have similar ideas, mechanics, and features, that's fine, as long as there is a strong creative vision behind it. The problem with many games is that vision is faint or just flat out gone. This happens with many big budget titles because the publisher, the source of the game's funding, wants to maximize profit by avoiding risk and serving people something that has been known to sell. This aversion to risk, these knowns, compromise the originality of the developer's vision. These companies utilize market data to determine trends and understand what is going to sell. But data and trends are indicative of something that has already been done, meaning the intention is to be unoriginal. This is where it becomes more difficult to classify a video game as art or not. The larger the budget, the more pushback there is from the publisher to play it safe. A game can have a fantastic team of artists working on it, creating unique, interesting, and beautiful things with a strong creative vision. But the publisher has the final say on everything, and their goal of making money can inhibit or even crush the vision of the creators. This does not lead to the creation of art. It leads to the creation of a product. There's no quantitative way of determining the ratio of creative vision to monetary gain that would result in an art piece or not, but I have a good rule of thumb. Throughout this video, you may have picked up on a theme I keep coming back to, and that is unique experiences. A unique experience is a great way to identify if something is original. These can be the entirety of a game or just small pieces that culminate in an overall original journey. Seeing a 15 in the title of a game doesn't scream originality, but Final Fantasy 15 is a pretty strange game. The combat alone is something I hadn't experienced before or really since. There's plenty of original ideas in this game, but there is one that really stands out to me. This game is not a platformer. There is never an instance where platforming is needed. There are some special items you can get by awkwardly platforming around, but none are necessary. That being said, the part of this game that I think is one of the most memorable is an entire dungeon that is only platforming. This is a post-game dungeon, so you have to beat the game to even play it. It only opens at certain times of the day in a very difficult area to get to, and it's not even marked on the map. It is incredibly obscure, and on top of that, it is one of the most awkward, frustrating things in the entire game. I love it. The game is clearly not made for platforming. It is so hard to control a jump's arc, land correctly, and just not accidentally walk off a ledge. It feels awful, and that's part of the fun. I respect the devs so much for designing such a fucked challenge. If it was mandatory, I would hate it. But the fact that it is optional and so obscure that most people who've played the game probably don't even know about it makes it incredibly charming. It is something I look forward to playing on every playthrough, and it's one of the most unique platforming experiences I've had. Psychopomp Gold is actually a game I made a video on that also inspired me to create the game genre Museum Likes. As you can see, the game's visuals are very dark and disturbing. The world alone is already very weird, but so is the movement. The movement in this game is locked to a grid where you can only move one unit of space at a time. If you want to turn, you have to stop, rotate 90 degrees, and then you can continue walking. It's very awkward, which adds to the discomfort of the environment, and it adds to the intensity of when a monster chases after you because it makes you feel more helpless. The fucked movement is intentional, and it ties into the feeling the designer wants the player to feel. A unique horror experience. God of War Ragnarök had an enormous budget, and it is an example of a septuple A game that actually justifies its production cost. This game has the beautiful visuals, the chunky ass folders, the bombastic music, the cinema writing, the hard-hitting performances, but doesn't sacrifice gameplay. The combat in God of War is a work of art in of itself. Santa Monica Studios understood the assignment, so all these gorgeous aesthetics are just gravy, but goddamn that gravy's good. It elevates the game to a level I never imagined an octuple A game could reach. Sure, it has storytelling outside of gameplay, but the camera never cuts, so it keeps you in the moment, even during cinematics. It almost feels like an extension of the last action you took, which I think feels much more rewarding than a standard cutscene. It is the best way I've seen a cinematic narrative executed in this medium, and the game is fucking fun, so it's just a blast. Beyond this, there are games like Cruelty Squad, Balatro, Pentiment, Blueprints. I shouldn't even have to explain why those games are unique and beautiful works of art. Yes, I think Cruelty Squad is beautiful. These games are unique experiences with uncompromised, fully realized creative visions. You cannot get the same experience from any other medium. And that's the key to the art of games, to any art form. These are experiences that can only be lived through this medium. An idea that plenty of these corpo slackjaws will never understand. They'll continue throwing money at something to try and mold it into the shape and imitate the function of something else, not understanding that doing so will kill the art and make the whole endeavor pointless. There's plenty of buggy, poorly thought out messes of games out there, but as long as the developer wants to express themselves and has a creative drive, then I'm all for it. I might hate your game, but I respect the hell out of you. Making a game is impossible. I could never fathom how you can make a good one. Hey everyone, Future Jimberly here. I don't normally cover current events because these videos take so fucking long to make, but it would feel irresponsible not to cover the whole mass censorship of Steam and itch.io thing that happened however long ago whenever this video comes out. For those of you who don't know, a bunch of adult games on Steam and itch.io, and even games that weren't adult on itch.io, were taken off of the digital marketplace because the payment processors threatened to stop working with them or something, which is Steam and itch.io's entire payment system is through these guys. And so they complied as quickly as they could, which is why itch.io took off so many games, but I think they're reinstating some of them now. I don't know if they're all being reinstated or not. Either way, fuck that. Fuck that. Censorship on this grand of a scale is never a good thing. It's only going to lead to the ruin of the medium, of art in general, because it's not going to stop here. Collective Shout, the people that made up that shit about Steam and itch.io and all that, they got Grand Theft Auto 5 taken off of store shelves in Kmart in Australia or something. They are not just going after quote-unquote adult games. Who knows where it would end? It probably wouldn't. They would just keep pushing for censorship of more and more shit until all of the media you consume is controlled by some authority figure. That sucks. Don't just be like, oh yeah, adult games, who cares? You should care. If you give a shit about the medium, if you give a shit about any medium, about art in general, you should fucking care. We can't let this become a precedent. Censorship can be a good thing. It can. Most of the time it's not. The only time it's a good thing is when it's protecting a victim, which I doubt, I highly, highly doubt there are any real victims in any of these cases. It's completely fictional, and it's something these dumbasses can't wrap their fucking heads around. Sorry for the ramble, because this is unscripted now. Anyway, I'm going back to the video. Holy shit, my throat hurts. Thanks for watching. This is my longest video to date, and it's killing me. If you could comment, subscribe, like the bell, that'd be swell. Here's the credits. They're early this time. I love art of all kinds, and I feel the public perception of this art form is being perverted by greed and arrogance. Thanks again. I look forward to the angry comments about the games I shat on. Ghost of Tsushima fucking sucks though. Video games can be art, but don't get it twisted. Aesthetics do not make a game. A loosely fitted story does not make a game. There is no value in a game that is trying to be exactly like another. Art requires self-expression, which drives a creative vision. Not all games are art, but I'm incredibly thankful for the ones that are. Peace.